and thank you for joining us again at Voice of Rohingya Radio, a registered non-profit media broadcast recorded in the state of Oregon in the United States of America. We are the media wing of the Arakan Rohingya Union, providing exclusive interviews, reports from inside the border, and the latest news from reputable sources from around the world. We ask you that you take a moment and go to www.vorradio.org for up-to-date news and information concerning this program and how you can get involved. Learn more about the Rohingya cause by supporting Voice of Rohingya Radio today. Voice of Rohingya Radio is the only news source of its kind in the English-speaking world, bringing you the latest news in a convenient format and keeping you informed and involved. You can listen to our program each week, Sundays at 7 p.m. Pacific Time. If you're interested in sponsoring our program, simply log in to our website or send us an email to support@vorradio.org. It is February 8th, 2015. For Voice of Rohingya Radio, I am your host, Zach Taylor. In our top story tonight, the Rakhine National Party and some civil society organizations have voiced their opposition to Parliament's decision to allow holders of temporary identification documents, or white cards, to vote in the constitutional referendum. In a statement on the 3rd of February, the ethnically Arakanese RNP have vowed to relentlessly fight the move, which would allow the stateless Rohingya people, a majority of whom carry white cards in western Burma's Arakan state, to vote in the referendum. Protests will be made via various means, groups have said. Bo Min, deputy chairperson of the RNP, told DVB Media that the party would stage mass street protests to reverse the parliament's decision if necessary. We see it as inconsistent that the Parliament has decided to allow white card holders to vote, while the Union Election Commission says that they are not allowed to form a party or be a member of a party, said Bo Min. He said there are over 700,000 white card holders in Arakan State. Ta Point, a community leader from the state capital of Sitwe, said that a brainstorming meeting between Arakanese civil society groups has been organized for the 7th of February to discuss methods of protest against the issue. We will weigh up whether to stage individual protests in the 17 townships across the state or to march from one town to the other. There is also the possibility to boycott the elections, Thaw Point told DVB. Parliament on Monday debated the national referendum for constitutional amendments bill and voted in line with President Thein Sein's recommendation to extend voting rights to white card holders. The proposal was approved by a vote from MPs with 328 votes in support and 79 objections. Pe Tan, an RNP lower house MP from Myeban Township of Arakan State, said the Parliament's Joint Bill Committee had previously rejected the president's recommendation in a debate on February 2nd, but later backtracked on their stance. The secretary of the Joint Bill Committee urged MPs to ignore the president's recommendation, but after a 30-minute break before the voting, the Joint Bill Committee had backtracked with the secretary then lauding the president's recommendation. Another Arakanese MP accused the speaker of pressuring the Joint Bill Committee to go back on their words, saying that there was no way the MPs would do a complete U-turn on the committee's words without a nod from Parliamentary Speaker U Shui Man. The Arakanese MPs in the debate argued that the white card holders should not be allowed voting rights, claiming that allowing non-citizens to vote would be in breach of Article 4 of the 2008 Constitution. Many of Myanmar's citizens are showing their opposition, with nationalist monks and lay people planning to stage 7 days of protests beginning on Monday to denounce the parliamentary decision. Applications seeking authorities' permission for the protests have already been submitted to the Bahan Dagon Township's police stations, organizers say. It's not like we won't protest because it's the government or a big organization, said the abbot of Magwe Monastery. We will do what we should be doing to any government or any organization that harms the nation, and we will ensure religion in this country does not disappear. The National Democratic Force said in a statement on Wednesday that the Union Parliament's decision is officially allowing non-citizens the right to vote, the highest right for a citizen, and that decision diminishes a Burmese citizen's birthright. Though white cards have existed for more than 2 decades, the controversy took an overtly political turn in the lead-up to the 2010 parliamentary election, when the then-junta government enfranchised about 1.5 million non-citizens for a poll that swept the military-backed Union Solidarity and Development Party to power. Critics said the move effectively amounted to vote buying. The Buddhist nationalist monk Uwarathu released a statement on Tuesday asking the President, Parliament, and Union Election Commission to rescind temporary citizens' referendum franchise, calling white card holders illegal immigrants. Warathu warned that if white card holders are allowed to vote in the coming general election, that he would lead in meting out the retribution. In other news, Aung San Suu Kyi insists that she can still lead Myanmar despite her fears that the transition from dictatorship has become a parody of democracy ahead of landmark elections due this year. The opposition leader vowed to campaign to curb the former ruling general's power and scrap a law that would stop her becoming president once polls billed as a decisive break from more than half a century of military control takes place. "It is dangerous, particularly because it's not a real democracy," she said in an interview in her offices in the vast parliamentary complex in Naypyidaw. "But there are many who would like to believe or pretend that it's a real democracy." Ms. Suu Kyi said that she had not given up on being president, even though many doubt she can overturn a constitutional provision that bars her selection by a post-election parliament because her children are not Myanmar nationals. She said constitutional reform was a live issue in Parliament on both this provision and another that guarantees the military a quarter of the seats in the legislature and, in effect, a veto on constitutional reform. "I am sure it will change, but when I cannot say," Ms. Suu Kyi, who will turn 70 this year, said of the legal bloc on her candidacy. But this kind of clause cannot exist forever. Ms. Suu Kyi said plans of President Thein Sein, a former general, and his almost 4-year-old quasi-civilian government for broad-ranging talks with various interest groups were an effort to sabotage the transition by making it chaotic. The government says its proposal is more democratic than the top-down approach of negotiations among a few senior political leaders favored by Ms. Suu Kyi. Ye Tut, information minister, criticized Ms. Suu Kyi's stance, saying she sometimes talked too bluntly about the military. "This kind of speech works in the Western political culture, but in the Myanmar political culture, it will not bring the results she wants," he said. Ms. Suu Kyi declined to go into detail on her National League for Democracy's policy on the economy, foreign investments, and resource licensing amid growing concerns over issues ranging from massive China-backed dam projects to the smuggling of drugs, gems, and timber. She stressed instead the need to first cut corruption, starting with the government itself, and build the rule of law in a country where institutions have been hollowed by the military. "This is not just an economic matter, it's very much a political matter," she said, referring partly to resource-sharing agreements with ethnic minorities. Ms. Suu Kyi has faced a backlash from some over her presidential ambitions, although she denied she had faced more criticism since being elected to parliament in 2012. Some Suu Kyi skeptics, who are beneficiaries of the status quo, worry that she may seek to shake up the established order. Even some admirers say that her dominance of the pro-democracy movement has stifled the emergence of alternative leaders and may have stemmed earlier possibilities for the military to cede power. You are listening to Voice of Rohingya Radio. Thanks again for listening to Voice of Rohingya Radio, your source for Rohingya news. We'd like to remind you to visit vorradio.org, where you can get involved and show your support. Myanmar authorities should stop prosecuting and threatening journalists and human rights defenders for reporting and speaking out about human rights abuses, Fortify Rights said today. On January 28th, the Myanmar military threatened legal action against anyone alleging that the military is responsible for the killing of 2 ethnic Kachin women on January 20th. The following day, the office of President Thein Sein directed the threat to members of the media. We are seeing worrying trends. Wartime violence against civilians is continuing, and the Myanmar military is increasingly using the justice system as a tool to silence critics, said Matthew Smith, executive director of Fortify Rights. The authorities should ensure swift justice for misconduct by soldiers rather than shielding them from public scrutiny and accountability. On January 20th, the bodies of two ethnic Kachin women aged 19 and 20, both volunteer teachers, were discovered in a room they shared in a village in northern Shan State. Pictures from the scene show multiple stab wounds on their partially clothed bodies, which were severely battered and bloodied. In the days that followed, villagers from the village and various human rights organizations alleged that soldiers from the Myanmar Army's Light Infantry Battalion 503 raped and murdered the women. Military personnel reportedly sealed off access to the village in the days following the murders and were involved in an investigation by local police into the crimes. On January 28th, Myawaddy, a journal operated by the Myanmar military, published a statement citing an ongoing investigation into the crime and claiming the Myanmar army was not involved in the murder case according to evidence analyzed by criminal police and other cooperating investigation teams. The military's statement in the Myawaddy went on to threaten legal action against anyone who alleged that the military, known in Myanmar as the Top Mada, was involved in the murders, stating, "The Top Mada will take action based on the rule of law against those who accuse soldiers and write about it after the official report is released by the investigation team." A spokesperson for the office of President Thein Sein supported the military statement, telling the independent news agency, the Irrawaddy, that media outlets could face legal action if they allege military responsibility for the murders. Fortify Rights is calling for an independent international investigation, including Myanmar partners, into alleged violations of international human rights, criminal and humanitarian law committed by all parties to Myanmar's various ongoing armed conflicts. The military's response to the tragic death of these women is to restrict basic freedoms, and that's telling, said Matthew Smith. The authorities need to protect people's rights, not promote a culture of fear and impunity. The threat of legal action against individuals accusing the military of wrongdoing reflects a pattern of conduct by Myanmar military and government. The military is seeking to flip justice on its head by prosecuting survivors and their family members, journalists, and human rights defenders, and the government seems content to play along, said Matthew Smith. The authorities need to understand they can't punish critics just because they don't like what they have to say. In other news, the New York-based Human Rights Watch cited the widespread persecution of Burma's ethnic Rohingya that has become a humanitarian crisis, the military's ongoing dominance in the country's politics, and little improvement in government transparency before the planned 2015 elections for what it calls a stall on human rights in the country. After 2 years of steady, if uneven progress, Burma's human rights situation was a car crash in 2014. Brad Adams, HRW's Asia director, said in a statement issued to the media. Mr. Adams noted that the government had so far failed to change the country's undemocratic 2008 constitution, which delivers a 25% of all parliamentary seats to the military. The army is still calling the shots on major issues, while the government seems confident it has satisfied other countries to keep the aid and investment dollars flowing. The government has received harsh international criticism for its refusal to recognize ethnic Rohingya, instead labeling them as Bengali, implying that they are foreigners. The country's census in March and April last year did not permit Rohingya to identify themselves as an ethnic minority, leading to boycotts. Preliminary results released last year revealed that as many as 1.2 million people were not included in the census. Meanwhile, United Nations High Commissioner on Rights estimate that there are as many as 140,000 Rohingya currently displaced inside Burma, forced to live in squalid camps due to fear of persecution. Human Rights Watch said that the number of Rohingya fleeing Burma by boat rose dramatically in 2014, with estimates suggesting between 50 to 100,000 people. Human Rights Watch said that freedoms of the press and religion were also under attack. 6 journalists were arrested while the dead body of another was found with apparent signs of torture following his arrest by the military in September. Mr. Adams warned that Burma's elections planned for 2015 look to reinstall a military-dominated government. Burmese authorities and donors are sleepwalking arm in arm into an electoral disaster in 2015, he said. Unless constitutional changes are made, the donors will wake up after Election Day to a government still controlled by the military. They need to press now for real human rights and democratic reforms. The United Nations human rights envoy to Burma on Thursday hit back at government claims that she was infringing upon state sovereignty and exacerbating tensions at the country, saying the criticism was hard to comprehend. Yang Hee Lee, the special rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Burma, told the Irrawaddy she was surprised at the various charges leveled at her by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in a press release published in state-run media on Wednesday. I have a mandate to monitor and report on the human rights situation of Burma, and it's really difficult to understand why the sovereignty issue was brought up, Lee said. I report in a constructive manner, and I've been very transparent throughout my mandate so far. The ministry's Wednesday press release, issued in response to Lee's statement on January 16th at the conclusion of a 10-day visit to the country, accused the rapporteur of selectivity and specifically objected to her remarks on Rohingya, land issues, political prisoners, media freedom, and the controversial Protection of Race and Religion legislative package currently before Parliament. The rapporteur questioned the ministry's assertion that race and religion draft laws were in accordance with the will of the people, describing the four bills as clearly against all international norms and in breach of Burma's international human rights treaty obligations. She also defended her use of the term Rohingya. In its statement, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs said that using such controversial terminology would only exacerbate tensions in the state. Everybody has the right to self-identification, Lee said, while acknowledging sensitivities over the term and the concerns of Buddhists in Arakan State. The fixation on the word is really paralyzing any resolution, and we need to get beyond this fixation. The special rapporteur is due to submit her latest report on the human rights situation in Burma to the UN Human Rights Council in March. We now move to Bangladesh, where authorities in Cox's Bazar district forced out thousands of undocumented Rohingya refugees from their makeshift refugee camps on Wednesday, leaving them homeless. Rohingya Muslims living in about 2,500 homes were driven out of the pine forest of Shamlabpur, a fishing village about 50 kilometers from Cox's Bazar. Officials estimated no more than 7,000 were evicted, though the country's most popular daily newspaper reported the figure to be 35,000. The refugees had lived in the area since the 1990s, occupying dilapidated houses and relying on fishing for their livelihood. All have fled sectarian violence in their native Rakhine state in Myanmar just across the border. Officials said the eviction is part of a policy to reclaim the area from illegal encroachers along Marine Drive Road that runs through the country's most popular tourist destination. We have followed instructions from the Prime Minister's office to clear government land close to Marine Drive Road. We have received many complaints that Rohingyas have been involved in various criminal activities in the area, said Magistrate Jahid Iqbal. Iqbal said the evicted refugees won't be sent across the border and that he was waiting for further instructions from higher authorities as to what aid would be provided to them, saying that he's written to the government for a rehabilitation package and aid and will have its response soon. The evicted Rohingyas, meanwhile, disputed Iqbal's claims that they were not forced out, saying that their homes were torn down by authorities. Since 1978, thousands have fled from Myanmar, many to the Cox's Bazar district, where around 30,000 Rohingyas reside in two official camps, relying on government and NGO aid for survival. As many as 300,000 reside in unofficial makeshift camps where they face strict restrictions on movements and are frequently exploited for cheap labor. The Bangladesh Prime Minister said in November that the government was planning to relocate Rohingya refugees to a better place from their camps in Cox's Bazar district. Details as to where that better place is have yet to be released. Thanks again for listening to Voice of Rohingya Radio, a weekly news program bringing you up-to-date information about the Rohingya people in Myanmar. You can catch our broadcast every Sunday night Pacific Time here in the United States by logging on to vorradio.org, or you can join our page on Facebook to find more information on the program. For Voice of Rohingya Radio, this is Zach Taylor, signing out.